If you just landed a new C-suite role, the CEO, for example, here's what I know. Leaders who take time to deeply listen, who create real psychological safety, who use multiple modalities to gather inputs, they make better decisions faster once they move to action. They waste less time, they build more trust, and they are far more likely to still be in the role in 2 years because they diagnosed the right problems. So I want to share how to do this well, the processes, the steps, the skills, and the questions you're going to need to make an impact quickly and finish your first year delivering on the promises you made at interview. This is part of a broader range of content related to strategy, goal setting, and achievement, and the connection to those is, of course, obvious. So follow me if this content is the kind that you like to watch. Let's go. So, the people in your organization, they have theories about why you are where you are and what needs improvement. They've got lots of them. Sales thinks it's a product problem, probably. Product thinks it's a go to market problem. Marketing thinks sales isn't executing, and engineering thinks the whole strategy is wrong. And everybody has a story about what leadership did or didn't do. Some of these theories are right, most are partial truths. A few are completely wrong, but deeply believed. And your job is difficult. Your job is to figure out which is which. But here's the challenge: people won't tell you the real story unless they trust you. And if you are new, they don't trust you yet. They've seen new leaders come in before, make big pronouncements, change everything, and fail. They're waiting to see if you are different. So the diagnostic phase isn't just about gathering data, it's about building trust whilst you gather data. It's about creating conditions where people will tell you the uncomfortable truths about strategy, about leadership, about culture, about themselves. And it's about doing this in a way that acknowledges a simple reality: people communicate differently. Some people process out loud and are great in conversations. Others need time to think and are better when they write things down. Some are comfortable speaking up. Others fear putting themselves out there. That's why the methodology matters as much as the skills. Let's start with the interpersonal capabilities you need to conduct these conversations well. The first is active listening, but not the kind you do in normal business conversations. This is listening to understand the system, not just to respond to the person in front of you. You're listening for patterns. When three people in different departments mention the same frustration, that's a signal. When someone's energy changes when talking about a particular topic, that's data. When someone is vague or hedges, that tells you something about psychological safety. This means you're listening on multiple levels simultaneously. You're listening to the content, what they're actually saying. You're listening to the emotion, how they feel about it. And you're listening for themes, how this connects to what you've heard from others. Practically, this means a few things. First, you're comfortable with silence. When you ask a question and they pause to think, you wait 5 seconds, 10 seconds. You don't fill the gap. That pause is where the real thinking happens. Second, you're reflecting back to confirm understanding, not parroting their words, but paraphrasing. What I'm hearing is that the sales team doesn't trust the product roadmap because priorities keep shifting. Am I getting that right? This does two things. It confirms you understand, and it signals that you're actually listening. Third, you're asking follow up questions that go deeper. When someone says, the strategy isn't clear, you ask, tell me more about that. What would clarity look like? When they say, we have a collaboration problem, you ask, can you give me a specific example of when that showed up recently? The second skill is reading body language and emotional signals. This matters because what people don't say is often more important than what they do say. When someone crosses their arms, when you ask about the executive team, that's information. When their voice gets tight talking about resources, that's information. When they look at the door while discussing culture, that's information too. So you're not psychoanalyzing people, you're noticing patterns. And here's what you're looking for. Where do people lean in? Where do they pull back? What topics generate energy? What topics shut them down? If three different people go flat when you ask about strategy, that tells you something about strategy. If people light up when talking about customers, but get resigned when talking about internal operations, that tells you something about where they find meaning. And you're managing your own body language too. You're staying open, uncrossed arms, forward lean, consistent eye contact. You're staying calm when you hear surprising or frustrating things. Because if you visibly react, if you look shocked or defensive or upset, people will start filtering what they tell you. The third skill is creating psychological safety. In each conversation, this is the foundation of everything. Psychological safety doesn't mean niceness. It means people can tell you hard truths without fear of retaliation. It means they can admit mistakes without career damage. It means they can disagree with you without risking their own safety. You build this through explicit statements and behavioral demonstration. Explicitly, you say things like, I need to hear dissenting views. The worst outcome is silence. Nothing you share will be used against you or anyone else. I'm here to understand, not judge. But more important than what you say is what you do when someone takes a risk. When someone shares bad news, you thank them. You stay calm. You ask questions to understand, not blame. When someone disagrees with you, you welcome it. I'm glad you're pushing back. Tell me more about what you're thinking. When someone admits a mistake, you normalize it. Everyone makes mistakes. What did you learn? What would you do differently? You focus on the system, not the person. What about our process contributed to this? Every time you respond well to someone taking a risk, everyone else sees it and they update their assessment of whether it's safe to be honest with you. The fourth skill is managing difficult emotions in conversations, both others and your own. You're going to hear things that make you angry. Decisions by previous leadership that were clearly wrong. Problems that should have been addressed years ago. Waste and dysfunction that make you want to fix things immediately. Your job is to absorb that and stay regulated. Because if you visibly get angry or frustrated, people will stop telling you things. They'll start managing you instead of informing you. When someone gets emotional in a conversation with you, if they get angry or start crying, you don't shut it down. You give them space. You might say, take your time. I can see this really matters to you. You offer tissue. If they're crying, you slow the pace. And when someone gets angry, you stay calm. You don't match their energy. You acknowledge it without necessarily agreeing. I hear your frustration, or it sounds like this has been really difficult. And you gently redirect to specifics. Help me understand exactly what happened. The key is staying present and regulating yourself whilst creating space for their emotion, because that emotion is data. It's telling you what matters, what hurts, where the pain points are. The fifth skill is the questioning technique. The questions you ask determine what you will learn. You're using mostly open-ended questions, not yes-no questions, not leading questions, questions that invite explanation. What's been your experience with the product launch process? How do you see the collaboration between your team and marketing? Tell me about a time when a customer was frustrated with us. You're asking for specifics. When someone makes a general statement, communication is bad here, you ask, for example, can you tell me about a recent situation where communication broke down? What happened? You're asking forward looking questions. What would success look like 12 months from now? If you could change one thing, what would it be? What opportunities are we missing? And you're avoiding questions that put people on the defensive. Early in your tenure, you don't ask, why didn't you? Or who's responsible for? Those sound like blame. Instead, you ask, what made that difficult? Or what would have needed to be different for that to work? The sixth skill is empathy without losing your own perspective. You need to understand how things feel from their vantage point, even when you disagree with their conclusions. When someone tells you the previous CEO never listened to us, you might think, actually, they had regular one on ones, but their experience was that they weren't heard. That experience is real, even if your interpretation of the facts is different. So you validate the experience. That must have been really frustrating. Or I can see why you'd feel that way. You don't have to agree with their conclusion to acknowledge their feeling. This is cognitive empathy, understanding their perspective, and emotional empathy, recognizing and naming the emotion. Both matter, but you maintain your own perspective. You're not taking on responsibility for every problem. You're not agreeing with every assessment. You're understanding their reality while maintaining yours. The balance is compassionate enough to connect, boundaried enough to lead. Now let's talk about how to structure this diagnostic phase to actually work. Because even if you have all the skills, if your methodology doesn't account for how different people communicate, you'll get an incomplete picture. So here's the reality. Some people think out loud. They're great in conversations. Others need time to process. They're much better in writing. Some people are comfortable speaking up in any context. Others fear being identified and need anonymity. Some people are spontaneous and give their best insights in the moment. Others need advance notice to give thoughtful answers. So if you only do one-on-one conversations, you'll miss insights from writers, preparers, and people who don't feel safe speaking up directly. If you only do a survey, you'll miss the depth and nuance that comes from conversation. The answer is deliberately using multiple modalities. You need anonymous surveys, shared in advance for those who want to prepare. One-on-one conversations for depth, small group discussions for team dynamics, and ongoing channels for follow-up thoughts. So let's walk through what this actually looks like. So you start with an anonymous survey in week 1 or 2. This serves multiple purposes. First, it gives you voice to people who aren't comfortable speaking up. Maybe they're junior, maybe they're in a function that hasn't been heard before. Maybe they're just introverted or cautious. The survey lets them contribute honestly. Second, it gives you baseline data across the organization. You can see patterns before you start conversations. This helps you know where to dig deeper. Third, it provides permission. When you're in a conversation and say, a lot of people mentioned collaboration challenges in the survey, it suddenly becomes safer for the person in front of you to talk about it too. It's not just them, it's a pattern. So the survey should be short, 15 to 20 minutes max. Mix quantitative questions with scales and qualitative open-ended questions. And ask about company performance, strategy clarity, execution challenges, culture, and what they'd change if they could. This is critical. Make it truly anonymous. Use a third-party tool. No email collection. Make all questions optional. And commit to sharing high-level results afterwards. If people think You're just checking a box. They won't be honest. Once you've launched the survey, you start scheduling one-on-one conversations. All of your executive team, all directors and senior managers, a sample of managers and individual contributors. This will take you into week 3 through to about week 6 or so. And here's what's different from typical one-on-ones. You send the questions 3 to 5 days in advance. Not a requirement to prepare, an option. The email says something like, I'm looking forward to our conversation. This is a listening session for me, and I want to understand your perspective on what's working and what's not. There are no wrong answers, and nothing you will say will be used against anyone. If it's helpful to think about these things in advance, here are some topics I'll likely explore. What's your experience been like here? What do you think has contributed to our growth challenges? What would you prioritize? No preparation is required. Do whatever works best for you. So this does several things. It reduces anxiety about being put on the spot. It gives preparers time to think. It signals transparency and safety. And it respects different thinking styles. Some people will prepare thoroughly, others will glance at it, some will ignore it completely, and all of that is fine. You've accommodated everyone. The conversations themselves follow a structure, but they're not rigid. You start broad. Tell me about your role. What's your experience been like here? You move to strategic questions. How would you describe our current situation? What do you think is driving our growth challenges? You get tactical. What's working in your area? What's not? What do you need more of to be more effective? And you invite open door. What else should I know? What haven't I asked you? You're taking notes by hand. Laptop open breaks the connection. You're staying fully present. You're using all those skills we talked about: active listening, reading signals, creating safety, managing emotions, and critically, you're scheduling buffer time between those conversations. 20 to 30 minutes to process, transfer notes, and reset yourself. Because this work is exhausting. You're absorbing organizational pain. You're needing recovery time between those sessions. So alongside those one-on-ones, you're also running small group sessions, 5 to 8 people, usually peer groups, or directors, or managers, or engineers, or salespeople. Why groups when you're already doing one-on-ones? Because group dynamics reveal things that individual conversations do not. You see how teams work together. You hear collective wisdom. People build on each other's ideas, and concerns get normalized. It's not just me who thinks this. Groups require different facilitation skills, though. You're managing participation, drawing out quiet people, redirecting dominators. You're handling disagreements productively. You're surfacing patterns without forcing consensus. But groups are powerful. The well-facilitated group session can surface in 90 minutes what might take 6 one-on-ones to uncover. Finally, you create alternative channels for people who don't fit the standard modalities. You offer written responses, same questions as the one-on-ones, but in a document that they can fill out in their own time. No judgment about length or polish. You have drop-in office hours, 2 hours a week where people can just show up. No agenda, lower pressure than a scheduled conversation. You create an anonymous follow-up channel, a Google form or suggestion box. After our conversation, if you think of anything else, you review it weekly. And the point is, you're giving people as many ways as possible to get information to you because you want a comprehensive understanding, not just input from people who are comfortable in the modalities that you prefer. So as you are going through this process, you're constantly synthesizing. Each conversation, you're transferring notes and looking for patterns. At the end of the week, you're reviewing themes across all the inputs that you've gathered. You're asking, what am I hearing from multiple people? What's showing up across different levels and functions? Where are perspectives diverging? What's supported by data versus perception? You're distinguishing signal from noise. If one person mentions something, it might be an individual grievance. If 30% of people mention it, it's systemic. If people across departments and levels describe the same problem, you found something real. You're tracking not just what people say, but how they say it. High emotional intensity matters. Consistency of narrative matters. Specific examples matter more than vague claims, and you're testing hypotheses. You're developing working theories. I think growth stalled because of X. And in subsequent conversations, you test that. I've heard a pattern. Does this match your experience? What would suggest that's not true? You're holding your theories lightly. You're staying curious. You're updating based on new information because your goal isn't to confirm what you already think, it's to understand what's actually true. By week 7 or 8, patterns should be clear. You know the top 5 to 7 themes. You understand where the organization is aligned and where there is divergence. You have a sense of what's broken, what's working, and what capabilities you have to work with. Now you can start planning action, not before. So let me close with this. Every new leader faces the temptation to skip this diagnostic phase or rush through it. You feel pressure to show action. Your bias towards doing things is probably going to kick in. You're anxious to prove you were the right hire, but here's what those who succeed understand. You can't fix what you don't understand, and you can't understand in 2 weeks what took years to create. The diagnostic phase done well isn't wasted time, it's the foundation for everything that comes next. The relationships you build, the trust you establish, the understanding you develop, these determine whether the organization will follow you when you start making changes. And here's what makes this different from typical getting to know everyone activities. You're deliberately using multiple modalities to accommodate how people actually communicate. You're creating real psychological safety so people tell you the truth. You're synthesizing systematically defined patterns, and you're moving with urgency through the listening phase so you can move to action with confidence. The leaders who do this well, they make fewer mistakes. In the next year, they build more trust, and they're more likely to still be there in 2 years because they diagnosed the wrong problems. So I really hope that was all useful. And if that's the kind of content that you're wanting to assimilate and use because you're on a mission to grow your company, to build great strategies, to build great culture, follow me for more of that kind of good stuff.